This is the Flaming Katy, and it's a popular houseplant, but how do you take care of it after the blooms fade? That's what we're going to learn today. I'm going to teach you how to pick a healthy one, how to care for it as it grows, how to prune it, how to repot it, and how to make it bloom again. Let's get started. When you're shopping for a Flaming Katy, first look at the blooms and pick the color that you like. Select one where the blooms are just starting to open, and that's going to give you the longest time to enjoy all of those blooms. Take a look at the leaves. You want to pick leaves that are green and glossy and plump and full of moisture. If you notice that the leaves are yellowing, that's a sign that it is getting too much water. If you notice that the stems are turning black, that's a sign of too much water. And if you notice that the leaves are pruny and wilty, that's a sign of not enough water. And you don't want to pick a plant that has been under stress because it's not getting the right amount of water. You might notice leaves like this that are dying at the tip. And it's not uncommon to have these leaves at the bottom. And it's happened because someone has grabbed the plant and pinched the leaf and it looks sad. And so leaves around the bottom of the soil like this are really not evident of a problem. If you're caring for a Flaming Katy, it's important to think about its native environment. This plant is native to Madagascar. This plant thrives in the mountains where it's getting morning sunlight and dappled sunlight in the afternoon and evening. The temperature range is as low as about 55 degrees and as high as about 85 degrees. It has a limited range of temperature that it can tolerate. It has a distinct wet season where it is warm and humid and moist, and it rains almost every day. And then it has a distinctive dry season where the weather is cool and arid with occasional rains. In its native environment during the wet season when it's warm, it is growing and getting taller and developing new stems and new leaf structures. And in the dry season, it doesn't exactly go dormant, but it slows down significantly. And it's during that dry season that this plant blooms. So in that native environment, we have some clues about how to take care of this plant properly. When you bring your plant home and you've got nice fresh blooms on it, it's important to deadhead the blooms that are being spent. So when you take off those spent blooms, you're actually encouraging it to have the next bloom open up, and you can have a longer bloom cycle, up to 3 months, if you do this properly. Because it blooms during the dry season, it's important to water it very carefully while it's blooming. It does need to be drenched when you water it. And then once it is fully watered, you want to let it dry out completely. Many people comment that they see the soil pull away from the side of the pot because it's shrinking as it dries out. And that's a great thing to look for. You want to actually insert your finger in the dirt an inch or so. And if it feels moist at all, you don't want to water it, particularly while it's blooming. Also, in that dry season, it's not getting any nutrients, so you don't want to fertilize it. And there's one more detail. This is often a house plant, but if it does not get enough sunlight, it will not be pretty. You'll notice when it's not getting enough sunlight that the leaves are much smaller and the color is not quite right, and it will shoot up stems with little tiny leaves on it. That's your sign that it's not getting enough sunlight. This plant can actually take 5 to 6 hours of direct morning sunlight, and it needs that sunlight in order to produce this big, healthy, green leaf. Once the bloom is spent, you want to prune it off. And it's tempting to prune it here at the top set of leaves, but that's going to leave you with an odd-shaped plant. You want to take the pruning all the way back to the biggest leaves. You could cut it here, or you could even take it underneath that set of leaves and cut it here. It's very common for the Flaming Katy to spread out as it grows and to not be as attractive because it has spread out. And so pruning it will help it to have more of a compact growth, and having branches close to the soil will help it to bush out and be more attractive in its appearance. There are many varieties of Flaming Katy, and many of them are native cultivars of Madagascar, which means you can freely propagate them and share them. But there are also cultivars that are protected by patent, so you always want to look at your tag to decide whether you can legally reproduce your plant by taking cuttings. Now this orange Flaming Katy is not protected by patent, and so I can propagate it, and I'm going to show you how you would do that. When you're pruning your plant, it's easy to take those pruned pieces for propagation. And to propagate by cutting, you want to choose the seam of the plant where the leaf is coming out. And it doesn't matter if it's at the tip of the plant or at the base of the plant. Any of these seams are capable of growing a root if you take the cutting properly. And so what you do is, at a 45-degree angle, you take your cutting right below the seam so that you haven't damaged that seam at all. And then you remove the leaf, and then you do the same thing to the next leaf. This produces damage on the stem, and that damage will spur the meristem cells to begin to activate and to grow new roots and new shoots. And you don't need a long piece at the top. You do want to have at least 2 leaves, maybe 4 leaves, like this. Now after you've taken your cuttings, you want to let them callus, and that means you're going to leave them out in the open air for 2 to 3 days, and that fresh wound will form a callus, and from that callus the roots will grow. And it's an important step. If you don't do this, it will actually rot instead of growing roots. For rooting succulents, you want to use a mixture of 1/3 peat moss, 1/3 perlite, and 1/3 sand. And you just mix it together. And you take your fresh cuttings after they have had time to callus, and you insert them into the soil right up to the base of the first set of leaves. And you put this in the shade, you moisten the soil, and you keep it consistently moist for a couple of weeks. And that's about how long it takes for this plant to root. Cuttings should be taken in the spring and summer when the plant is fresh and growing, and that's when the roots are going to grow the fastest. That's your best chance of having success with this process. Now there is another way to propagate this plant, and that is with a leaf cutting. And I've seen lots of information online about how to do this. You have the same kind of cutting, and you very gently take the leaf off, and as long as it's a clean break, you can actually let this callus and put it in the dirt, and it will grow a new plant. The trick with this, though, is it takes 3 to 6 months for this little root to start growing a new plant. So if this is your method for reproducing your plants, it's going to take you a good long while to have a new plant. The roots on your Flaming Katy are fairly small and slow growing, but you do occasionally need to repot it. And when you do that, you want 1/3 mixture of compost, 1/3 of sand, and 1/3 of perlite. This will create a very well-draining soil so that the roots of the plant can dry out really quickly after you drench it and water it. Now, caring for the Flaming Katy in the long run, over the next few years after it's finished its bloom cycle, it's important to think about that cycle in the native environment. During the warm season, it is going to grow and flesh out and produce new stems and new leaves. And then during that cooler season, when it's dry in Madagascar, it is going to slow down and it's going to begin to produce new blooms. But there's a trick to that. In order for a Flaming Katy to produce a bloom, it takes a very distinct sequence of night and day. It needs to have 10 hours of daylight and 14 hours of darkness, and it needs to be complete darkness. So if you're living in a part of the world where you don't really get that cycle of 10 hours of daylight with 14 hours of darkness, you're going to want to cover it up or put it in a closet and have at least 6 weeks of that cycle of daylight and darkness. And if you do that, you can make the Flaming Katy bloom whenever you want it to bloom. It'll bloom in the spring, it'll bloom in the summer, it'll bloom in the fall, it'll bloom in the winter, provided it has that distinctive cycle of night and day. But taking care of it in the long run, you need to let it rest. You need to have a time of blooming during the cool season and a time of growing during the wet season when it has more moisture. Providing this annual cycle of time where it grows and fleshes out and then time where it slows down and blooms will help you to have a healthy Flaming Katy for years to come. But remember that that pruning process is very important. It will spread out, it will get leggy and long, and it will not be attractive when it does that. So you need to prune it on a regular basis to keep it compact. So with these simple tips, you can take care of your Flaming Katy for many years to come. And I hope you choose one and bring it home and have great success with it. Thanks for playing in the dirt with me. If I've taught you something new, please give us a like. If you've got a question, drop a comment. I'll be happy to answer it. And I'll see you next time on The Handcrafted Garden.